Hello there, Mandy here. Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart is not just a podcast. It's also a book, a free online grief group, and a one-on-one private coaching practice. If you are interested in learning more, visit mandykapehart.com to find out how restorative grief can help you heal heart, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 215, titled From Burnout to Alignment, Neurodivergence, Resourcing, and Restorative Healing with Michele Oelking. Have you ever felt completely overwhelmed, like your body is carrying a story your mind cannot fully make sense of? Well, my guest today, Michele Oelking, knows this firsthand. In 2020, after a devastating loss and learning the challenges of solo parenting through COVID, Michele found herself exhausted, anxious, and burned out, despite all the tools she had spent years teaching to others. That season of life became her turning point. So instead of just coping, Michele decided it was time to take her 25 years of experience with neuroscience, trauma-responsive coaching, and cultural anthropology to help people move beyond overwhelm and step into wholeness. So in this conversation, we are talking about how burnout, grief, and neurodivergence can show up in the body and how awareness and regulation become our pathways to resilience and restoration. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and today my guest is Michele Oelking. She knows firsthand how our bodies can tell the story of our losses and our grief when our life starts to unravel. In 2020, she had a devastating loss and began challenging herself to solo parent through COVID and found herself just exhausted, anxious, and overwhelmed. So, despite all of the tools and years she'd spent teaching others, she truly realized that this is where we can transform how we begin to heal because healing in isolation is incomplete. So, today we're talking about how grief lives in our body and how we can practice new regulation techniques to build some resilience and grow even from the disorienting of seasons. So, Michele, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mandy, for having me. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me as well. I think that my first instinct of when I ran into you and your work was so relational because I myself am neurodivergent. I have unending projects and overwhelm and activities and lots of grief events that are always ever present and demanding attention. And so hearing how you have supported yourself well through it and been able to offer that for others was such a draw.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a journey.
Yeah. Well, so let's start there. It started with so much loss in the middle of COVID. Why don't you just kind of give our listeners an understanding of where you began with your personal work and how it transformed your understanding of what healing work can look like?
Oh, yeah. Well, I can go really far back and say, I grew up in a family where there was complex developmental trauma. And it's sort of what inspired me to seek my master's in social work. I really wanted to be an advocate and do clinical work with children and families. Um, Early on in my 20s, I had been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, but yet I thought that there was something more, to the diagnosis. And of course, studying systems work, I started to question, person and environment and the influences of childhood. And I've integrated so much of that and made peace with it. But really looking at my own neurodivergence, I've come to understand I was diagnosed at 32 with ADHD. And I truly believe that it is due to CPTSD.
Mm.
For me, that feels really resonant and appropriate. I know that that can be complex. So, I going back to your question, 2020, I married very young, and we did endure, I would say, some pretty significant challenges as a young couple in our 20s. Um, my husband had played competitive soccer and had sustained many, many concussions. And in the early 90s, no one was talking about head trauma or CTE or any of those things. And when he started to develop physical and mental signs and symptoms, I didn't know what that was, even with my social work, my clinical background. And so I'll just share throughout that process over the years, he had a lot of physical and mental impact. And, we had parental loss. My mom died unexpectedly in my late 20s. We went through Hurricane Katrina. We relocated to San Francisco. There's just so much change. My daughter was born there. We moved back to New Orleans, and then I moved to Colorado. All this to say, I found myself married in 20 years of being with my partner and co-parent. And we decided to amicably separate. And going through that process was immensely challenging, as one can imagine. And we had arrived in the beginning of the beginning of 2020, late 2019, where we had, created this loving partnership where we're co-parenting our daughter, and his symptoms started to worsen. And in February of 2020, he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And it was such an unbelievable and devastating shock to all of us, in trying to navigate that during the pandemic, treatment, or all of the things. He did pass in May of 2020, which, left me, as you mentioned, being a single parent to a very young daughter, living in a state far from any family or friends, really. We had a very small community. And so I really had to dig deep. It was like everything that I knew in my being. And I had experienced burnout earlier in my life, but this was next level. Like, this was so next level burnout. Um, and everything that I had done professionally or personally in the past to be resilient. I mean, I knew, I laugh in some ways because that was me. I was the high achieving type A, pick yourself up from your bootstraps, Gen Xer. Like, I have made my way through challenge all of my life. I know what that's like. I was good at it. I also realized that for many, many years, I pushed through and I masked and I lived in what I call the go, go, go crash cycle, like many of my fellow ADHDers. But this was, like I said, next level. And to your point, I really had to get into my body and start figuring out a different way.
Yeah, the go, go, go crash cycle is not something I can relate to at all. That's never been my experience. I can't imagine what that would be like. Just kidding. Um, that's pretty much the way I think so many of us have been taught both to survive the ongoing demands of our time and attention, both in cycles of grief and out of active grief, but also when we approach healing as well. It's this, shotgun approach of let's just pour really hard towards one area of healing, whether that's mind, mental support, or physical support, or we can dig 100% into our grief and we cannot find any growth until we've really dug in deep, right? We have to really know what the roots of our grief are. There's this siloed approach to um, who we have become as people, and I feel like it's very embodied in that in that 100% all or nothing, you know, dissonant approach to just living through all of the things. So why do you feel like that has been so normalized for people who are neurodivergent, but even for people who are not?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I th if you know, if think we think about it neurobiologically, right? The dysregulation puts us in those states of compression. If we're in a highly sympathetic state, where a lot of folks I know who have ADHD or neurodivergent living in fight or flight and eventually the crash, as we talk about, biologically, you aren't expansive. You are actually in a tunnel vision or a black and white mode because everything in your brain and body is telling you have to be, you're in survival state to do so. And so I think that is something that I don't know that a lot of people are really aware of from a neurobiological perspective. We talk a lot about executive functioning. We talk about emotional dysregulation connected to ADHD, but underneath all of that are these mechanisms that are so hardwired into our biology. They're subconscious, they're primal. And in many ways, I really appreciate talking about it because it provides a way out of the shame and the guilt and the sort of moral failing that so many of us have felt or that people believe to be the case. Even going back to programming with young kids, I worked with young kids for many, many years. And, if you look at it just from a behavioral standpoint, what is wrong with this child? Why is this child disruptive? Why are they not engaging? And why are the social cues not there? Not understanding what's underneath the surface of all of that. I think to answer your question, very long-winded, I think it's just the sociocultural conditioning, and a lot of Western individualistic programming, to be honest.
Yeah, I think frequently about how my own work, personally and professionally, is limited by this Western lens and trying to recognize, okay, this is our experience in a very financially driven capitalistic culture, and that changes how we approach. And I think too, we, especially as neurodivergent people, we tend to rely on that base skill of trying to think our way through everything in front of us. If I can just come up with a logical process, if I can just get another system or another format of tracking or productivity, I can get myself out of this burnout or grief. I'm curious, what patterns do you notice in people who consistently go back to that type of problem solving for themselves?
Yeah, and it is systemic and individual. Like I mentioned, I can think to my work probably for the last decade or so. I've done coaching, leadership coaching, and consulting in a lot of tech spaces. So a lot of neurodivergent folks that I'm working with. And even in that environment, the emphasis is on the intellectualization.
Mhm.
A lot of people come from, it was the case for years, were recruited from highly sought after academic institutions. And the emphasis on picking, the highest achievers in the room and, thinking out of the box, but really you're working within the box of the constraints of working within corporate or tech. I think that's a big part of it. There's so much emphasis on left brain and on intellectualization. I see patterns where people are so disembodied and so disassociated and so disconnected from what's happening below the neck. There's It's so immense, the overriding of signals, even specific examples of what that looks like in the day, not getting up to go to the bathroom or skipping lunch or just really not understanding when they're feeling a surge of cortisol or adrenaline, or an email comes in and it spikes and it puts them into fight or flight, like all of these things that are happening real time. So much of what we're doing in the beginning is mapping and tracking, how are these states showing up? How are people either transitioning or being flexible up and down the autonomic ladder, or not being stuck and immobilized or stuck in fight or flight?
Where would you invite someone who is in those places to begin mapping? What does that first step toward regulation actually look like for someone who has no idea?
Yeah, I think the first step is awareness, right? That we know how hard it is with our working memory a lot of times.
Yeah.
So one of I take a step back and think about this. The old version of how I would coach years and years ago when I was working, I would say between 2012 to 2015, I was meeting with a lot of college students then. And we talked a lot about EF hacks and strategies. And I still believe that those have a place. Top-down strategies have a place.
Mhm.
Yet we have to start bottom up. So what I say is externalize your working memories, set alarms on your phone, put post-its, however you need that cue, the visual or auditory or whatever cue it is, to literally force yourself to have a pattern interrupt and check in throughout the day. I think that's the first step because it is overwhelming to even start to figure out how do you begin to do so.
What about the strong-willed people who have the pattern interrupts? Not that this is personal at all, but and then continue like, but I'm in hyper focus. I'm going to utilize this, and I've got too many distractions. So if I can turn on hyper focus right now, what is the problem with that if it means something actually gets done?
Oh yeah. And I love this because I love a good flow state. Like even for myself, I do not interrupt me when I'm in the middle of flow,
Yeah.
you know? And so what I say to that is you more I like really focusing on energy management over time management. And if it's something that lights you up, which oftentimes is when we are so immersed in a project or task, it's like, okay, well, if you're well resourced, you know, if you slept well, if you're hydrated, if you're nourished, all of the things, and you're committing, you like commit to it and do it and know that at the end of that, you're going to come out of that state, if it's been 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever that looks like, and you allow yourself to walk away, close the laptop, take a walk outside. I don't believe in fighting the ways that our brain naturally works best. I believe in really leaning into that, but creating, and granted, this is easier with entrepreneurs than it is if you're in a more traditional corporate setting.
Or, yeah,
But yeah, I totally recognize that that can be advantageous and also simultaneously it can be challenging when
yeah.
hyperfocus kicks in.
Yeah. So this is why I love learning more about your work because you hold so much intelligence about neurodivergence and coaching with people who are dealing with ADHD, but you also have a trauma informed practice. And so when we have someone who, let's say they're learning how to resource themselves well and they are managing their workload and managing their day-to-day life and things feel pretty steady even with a historical trauma background, right? And then bam, more grief comes along, something new changes, a job loss, a partner loss, illness, any number of things that can really disrupt what feels not just like flow state in those moments, but that can feel like, oh, I'm in a flow experience. My life seems to be moving with ease. How do you help that person who now feels like often, man, I have been fighting upstream. I found something that works and now it's exploded yet again. Now,
Yeah.
where do I go?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so true. There's a couple things that I'm thinking about. Like we always say too, and I know this can be hard. It's hard for a lot of my clients. It was hard for me to, you have to build in those resources and the resourcing and support when things are going well, using them like consistently, right? It's like, okay, when things are going well, when I'm feeling like in flow, when everything is working, it could be easy to think, I don't need to take this movement break. I don't need to get outside or I don't need time for myself. Like I'm in it and I feel so motivated and inspired. I'm just going to like plug away. But I think that is one of the most important pieces, and why a soft accountability partner or coach or whatever you want to call it, a partner on the journey, can be so helpful for someone with neurodivergence, because it's that perspective taking and externalizing that outside of oneself. And then what I also see, and this happened to me in my first burnout phase, where I think a lot of us are really good at handling the crisis. Like that's not like, like I said, that ton we're wired for it, because that's when adrenaline and cortisol kicks in and it's like it's go time, tunnel vision, we are powering through. I find it's the little tasks. My daughter and I were actually talking about this the other day. She's 17, she's wired just like me, and she's like, "Mom, why is it that I made it through all of these situations and yet like one little, the pencil breaking or like the noise, like the small things that become so magnified and so irritating will spin people out. Like that's going to be the straw that broke the camel's back." It's like, it's so fascinating.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So many different experiences and conversations, both with my daughter and even with other kids. I'm a soccer coach as well. And so I've got all these little things I was thinking, I'm like, oh my gosh, every big injury, I am immediately as calm as can be, flagging down who needs to be flagged. But you ask me a third time where your ball needs to sit on the field. And sometimes it takes me a good 30 seconds of just give me a second, let me breathe, because this is too disruptive to me. This doesn't let me stay in that pocket of ventral vagal open system where I can connect with you and be available. I'm immediately pushed into that to that overwhelm. But even and this is where it's interesting too, in those moments where I feel like, okay, I'm very capable, I'm a whole person, I am well resourced, even when I'm tired, right? Even when I know, okay, I'm doing a lot, I'm not getting quite enough rest, but I do feel resourced enough. In those moments, how are we to really honor, actually, I need to reset everything right now. I don't feel, I know cognitively that I am this whole resourced person and I'm working towards growth and healing all the time. But in this moment, I kind of want to devolve. I kind of want to collapse. And it does feel like it's a pencil breaking that sends me down that road. What can a person do, or where should their attention go in those moments of, oh no, this is a meltdown?
Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge first that it's okay that we have those times and we have space to allow ourselves grieve and process emotionally or discharge the energy. Um, Granted, it depending on the scenario or environment, that might mean leaving the soccer field and going to the car or asking for someone to step in. Um, this part is really hard because for those of us who don't have a huge support system or network or community, reaching out and asking for help either sometimes isn't necessarily available, or if you've been really hyper independent, it's hard. So I do want to acknowledge that part as well. I think allowing, they say name it to tame it, feel it to heal it. There's so many of these terms, but titration has been something that has, as subtle as it is and sometimes hard to recognize, the way that that has built capacity in my system and how I see that for clients. It's not super sexy. It's not like this wow experience. It happens over time, but that has been so foundational and so transformative. So I think it is like letting yourself turn the faucet a little bit. If it's a little bit, I'm going to release this emotion. And if I have space and I need to really let it go and let it out, I'm going to like let it flow. I'm going to turn the faucet way up and let it flow, and recognizing like where where we need to do that and when is so important. And again, I think it's something that a lot of people need to be guided through.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to stay there for a minute too, because I think titration is like you said, it's such a simple concept and it's a practice of a lifetime and it's feels kind of overwhelming to start. And so when I think about burnout, it's one of the most powerful tools to really let people move toward, or rather move away from believing rest is their answer, and moving towards something that actually feels restorative. And so, why don't you, in the simplest of terms that you can, just describe what is titration and how can someone begin to practice it for themselves?
Yeah, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter Levine describes it as sort of like a rubber band, being
Yeah.
able to expand and contract. And so that's basically what we want to build. Um, there's this myth that I am so adamant in busting on the internet that our nervous system regulation means calm all the
Right.
time.
Right.
And it's not. It's
Yeah.
adaptability. It's having that flexibility, like I said, that sort of rubber band, like, you can move with, ride the waves, not be
Yeah.
capsized by them. And our nervous system is electrical. So you could say also like holding the charge or expanding into. I really appreciate what you said about not necessarily rest being the answer. I find a lot of the women I work with have been in such chronic states of activation and stress that they sometimes confuse calm with immobilization. They're actually numb and shut down. And it's like, oh, I'm finally feeling calm. When we start to map it, they're really numbed out. And so we have that. We also have the societal conditioning of women have been programmed to be good girls and people please and not speak up. And a lot of what, we know inattentive ADD or what girls have been diagnosed with historically, it's more the internalized activation that's running nonstop. That's how it's been for me for, most of my life. So having a voice, taking action, stepping into places where you're bringing more charge into your system, bringing in some healthy activation and movement or vocalization even is the answer. And you're right. It does take a lot of awareness and of course safety, true safety, what we feel comfortable and what we feel not, I shouldn't say comfortable, can that could be a tricky one, right? What's
Yeah.
comfortable isn't necessarily safe. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
It does. And I can tell your passion is right under the surface. And that's an easy soapbox too for you because that's same. I love disrupting someone's understanding of what calm and what regulated really looks like. There are times when I'm like most regulated because I've been jumping and shouting. And I've released a lot of that energy that's really stuck. I feel more regulated after kickboxing or after yoga or and the same experience from two very different modes of moving the body, right? Those are
Right.
incredibly opposite. And so I think what you're hitting on too is just that recognition that if we want to live differently through our overwhelm and avoid burnout in a way that isn't just fear based, we have to remember to learn differently about who we are as people and how we were created and designed internally, because our misunderstanding of what the body is doing and those signals that we are absolutely overlooking really is where we can take some autonomy back into our own lives and not be so moved by every wind that comes our way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm hearing you say something that even through my own journey I had to learn in my late 30s, I would say, maybe early 40s if I'm being really honest, of the difference between external regulation and internal regulation. Like I said, the people pleasing, living with the trauma, navigating everything and every experience and being sensitive to all the energies in the room and being okay if other people were okay, and all of that external regulation just, it completely threw me and it completely bottomed me out. And so, yeah, learning how to internally be able to know my own compass and my own cues and intentions and desires and all of it is so important.
Yeah, you are describing a lot of your methodology in your portal, Overwhelm to Ease method, right?
Mhm.
That the four pillars of our wellness: physical well being, emotional flourishing, spiritual growth, and connection. And that is something that's so important in restorative grief as well. We need to address that holistic personhood. So, how do you invite people not to the overwhelm of paying attention to all four areas, but really just into the conversation about why it matters to address all of those rather than prioritizing just one area?
Yeah. Well, I would say whether it's in the group format or I have a self-paced course that's similar or one-to-one, it's important because I have strategically set these pillars up because they build upon one another. So, we always start with the nervous system regulation first and then sort of look at these other areas. But why I think it matters in that way is because, and I'm thinking about moms in particular right now. When we can start to nourish ourselves, and we have more space to pour into our family and our kids and other people, there's such a denial of for all of the reasons. So it's sort of like, and boundary work is included. Um, it's intentionally built that way because I really believe when people start to do more regulation work and their capacity increases, then they can bring in, it's not just about holding, right, the life that you have, which is so important. It's also though about like, where do you want to expand into? Like if you've been shut down and you've been diminished and you don't really know, you've been operating on autopilot. It's like really getting into a place of like, what could be possible? Like, what's next? I'm 49. So I talk to a lot of my friends and clients too in perimenopause where it's like this hits home really hard. Um, and so without it being overwhelming, right? It's like you don't want to just completely overhaul everything at once, but we are looking at little opportunities for enhancement. And so it's I know that's very general because it's kind of nuanced, but I will say that, yeah, I think it is important to really recognize how each part builds upon itself.
Yeah. Well, and they're interwoven. You can't, again, there's no way to silo parts of who you are out truly. You just end up with this piece that doesn't quite work no matter what you do or what systems you try or medications you begin to take. When you have a piece that's just been left out in the cold, then that piece of you eventually will extend its numbing into all those areas that seem to be getting all of the treatment and the rest and the attention that they need.
Right. Now that's very well said.
Yeah. Do you have a moment in your own healing journey where you recognized, oh, I've stepped over this coping threshold and I am moving towards this feels like restoration?
Yeah. I noticed it significantly. I mean, as you know, grief comes and goes, right? But my baseline generally is less anxious. I used to live in such an anxiety fueled state. Like, as I mentioned earlier, being like, the overachiever type A, I would look back and really kind of think my anxiety kept my ADHD in check, meaning I got to places on time, I performed well, I kicked it out of the ballpark because anxiety, adrenaline, cortisol, however you want to describe it, was fueling me nonstop. I don't have that anymore. Thankfully, I feel pretty steady. Anxiety does keep up. Of course, like I say, stressors don't go away, right? The triggers don't go away ever. I mean, this is life. But I found that I just have more steadiness and then my baseline is way less anxious than it used to be.
This is kind of an adjacent question. How do you help clients who are looking for a quick fix and start taking supplements by someone they found on the internet. And then they start taking another supplement. And then they start this nutritional regimen. And then they start this piecemeal approach from, I'm going to say so called experts because it's really easy to label yourself an expert these days.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like it's very, very reckless. I also know that is a state of desperation that leads us to think maybe there's a quick fix to help. What's your guidance for someone who's at that stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I agree with you. I think it's hard to discern or parse out people who have, the education and lived experience and embodiment, right? Because so much of what we see is just information to digest.
Mm.
But how is it truly being embodied and taught? I because I'm an ICF coach, meaning an International Coach Federation credential coach, there's ethical standards and guidelines. So when I'm meeting with people, fit is super important. I mean, I don't necessarily want to turn someone away, but I am assessing for them. Like a quick fix is not in my ballpark or within
Yeah.
the scope of what I'm doing. And I'm very, very honest and open about it. Now, I'm willing and more than agreeable to collaborate with other doctors, providers, practitioners, but welcome in different types of support that clients are using. Yeah, quick fixes. This is not the name of the game on that.
Well, and I think that's your trauma responsive approach, right? That's awareness of the fact that this is not just because you keep eating gluten on Saturday mornings in abundance. This is because on the basis level, there's something that's really upsetting your nervous system and lack of safety. And there's a message that you are repeating somewhere down the line that's reinforcing why you're avoiding or why you're coping in ways that don't serve you anymore.
Yeah. And I'll say I do ask, my minimum commitment is 12 weeks
Mm,
with an individual client, and then our group is 16 because I've built in time for integration. It's not just, there's a lot of active learning in those spaces, but there's integration time too. So I think to your point, it's important to have that space.
yeah. I love the idea of a minimum commitment. I think people come into this type of work wanting like, oh, in 5 sessions, I'll be set. Saying, no, truly, you need as much time as it takes. And here's a baseline expectation for you. It's not going to take, quote unquote, at least 12 weeks. However, within this window of time, we're going to reassess and see where you're at and see what you feel supported within and where you still have questions. How does that go over with people when you are trying to give them some expectations of self compassion for this process as well?
Oh, right. Yeah. And to your point, yeah, a lot of people that I'm meeting with are completely overwhelmed, depleted, burnt out. And so
Yeah.
it's, wow, that feels like a heavy lift. But through
Yeah.
conversation, and dialogue, and again, determining if it's the right fit, I feel we come to an understanding, and there's trust built either through folks following me for a long time or conversations that we're having. Um, and so, yeah, and then simultaneously, there are people that are like, I'm gonna, go watch this YouTube and I'll come back to you if I feel like I need something else. And that's totally okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah. People are not always ready to do the work, like you said. And with you, because you might not be the right fit in this season. And I think that I mean, that's a mark of someone that can be very trusted when you have a professional say, like, it's not me, it's not you, it's just not the right chemistry because we want you to succeed. We want you to feel capable and embodied with what you learn here. And if I'm not the right person for you, say the word. It's not about me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Michelle, I'm curious with everything you've recovered through and built and are now facing, just like the rest of us here in the US, with everything that seems to be, constantly working to dysregulate us. What lights you up? How are you creating connection and maintaining vitality and balance for yourself through these ongoing stressors, to put it mildly, that we're experiencing.
Yeah. We didn't talk about this earlier, but in that year of 2020, 2021, I decided to move. My daughter and I, we moved out of Boulder and intentionally into a small mountain town because I knew that I needed space to heal and I needed an environment that was slow.
Mm.
And it was the best move for both of us. And nature for me is so foundational. I didn't realize this most of my life because I lived in pretty large cities. Um, but this is home more so than anything. I get outside all of the time. It's non-negotiable. That lights me up. I am sort of an adrenaline junkie. I love rafting. I love hiking. I love rock climbing, all of the things. So Colorado is the perfect place for me. I love being creative. It's one of the things that I enjoy about being an entrepreneur. The freedom, obviously, the creativity that is involved in doing this work, the impact. I love being able to work in an online space where I feel like I can reach people, all over the world.
Yeah.
So, so fascinating too. And of course, being a mom, um, to my daughter who's now 17, there's so many things, but yeah.
I love it. Michelle, your work is going to make a big impact on the people listening to the show. I can already tell. So, if they want to learn more about Souljourn coaching or what you offer, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Souljourn Coach and on Substack. And my website is souljourncoach.com. And I'm on LinkedIn too, for those who are wanting to take that route.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, I will make sure that all of this is available in the show notes. If you're listening and something that Michelle has said gave you some light at the end of your neurodivergent, overwhelm, burnout tunnel with everything right now, I would highly recommend you reach out to her and learn more about her ongoing group coaching cohorts or even consider one-on-one connection with Michelle. Thank you so much for making time with me today. This has been pure joy and such an encouragement for my little ADHD, overwhelm, burnout brain to remember tools are available. Tools are just to be used. They're not fixes. They're not like magic wands. They're tools, and you need to engage with them for them to do their job. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Mandy. It's my pleasure. It's been such a beautiful conversation. It's so great to connect with you.
Thank you for listening to episode 215 of Restorative Grief. If you are feeling that familiar mix of burnout and grief and overwhelm, I really hope this conversation reminds you that you do not have to silo yourself to heal. You don't have to heal one part at a time. True restorative work is about integrating, about bringing all of the pieces of who you are and who you are becoming into one place where they can be safe, cared for, and attended to as they need. Learn more about Michelle's work on her Instagram account, Souljourn Coaching, and certainly check the show notes if you're interested in her group ongoing cohort or one-on-one support for your own experience. Restorative grief is my favorite way of showing up in the world to support people who are going through similar experiences in life as well. So if that's you, if you are grieving and you're not sure where to go next, please consider subscribing to the show, leaving a podcast review, and certainly you can become a patron as well, where you will gain access to additional bonus episodes as well as a weekly workbook that supports integrating all of these conversations into your daily grief work for yourself. If this is the first time you've listened, I'm so grateful you're here, and I hope you'll subscribe and decide to stick around a little while longer. Shout out again, as always, to my patrons. You are such a gift, and I'm so grateful you are here. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.